Okay then, I trust that we've got everyone on board. Good evening to you all, and a very warm welcome to you all to this National Forest webinar. Possibly there will be an opportunity for you to speak your mind. My name is Geraint Jones. I'm the Farming Connect Technical Officer, and I will facilitate and chair the panel this evening. I'll report your questions to the panel for them to discuss.
Welcome to all that have joined us for the National Forest webinar, where you'll have an opportunity to have your say on the concept. And my name is Geraint Jones. I'm a Forestry Technical Officer for Farming Connect, and I'll be facilitating and chairing the panel discussion this evening and relaying your questions and comments for discussion by the panel. Before I proceed, as this webinar will be in Welsh and English, I'll direct you to the translation process. If those of you that want to listen in English can please click on the interpretation tab and select Korean. That's at the bottom of your screen on the right hand side. So if you select the Korean as the language.
And if you've clicked on Korean, you should be able to hear the interpreter speak right now.
I know it's a bit bizarre.
Okay, so if you've clicked on the Korean option, you should hear the interpreter.
Alvin Jones, who will be delivering the translation service this evening. I'll also tell you that and inform you that the webinar is being recorded. You'll also see a question and answer tab available so that you can comment or send in your questions. That's at the bottom of your screen. And you can do this at any time during the webinar presentation and discussion. So don't be shy. Just click on the tab and you'll see a box to write and submit your comment or question. Okay, if everybody has access to translation, has done so.
So I trust that those of you who need translation have access to it. It's working all right. If someone can give us a thumbs up on the reaction button and tell us that it's fine.
James. Yeah, thank you very much.
So, as I said, we are exceptionally fortunate this evening that we have a panel of specialists with us this evening to discuss the concept of the National Forest, and I'll introduce the panel first of all. We've got Anne McGoyne, who's a Stakeholder Engagement Officer working on land management and woodland for Welsh Government. We've got James Biot, who's the head of the National Forest Policy for Welsh Government, and there will be a presentation by James about the project's concept at the start of this evening. Erica Dawson-Davis, the head of the National Forest Programme, was due to join us on this webinar. Unfortunately, she is unwell, and therefore we wish her well in her recovery and wish it to be a speedy recovery. Following on from the presentation by James, panel members will offer an overview and some comments of their own, and we'll discuss then your comments and your questions. And we have with us this evening Richard Rodrick, a farmer from the Brecon Beacons, who's been a demonstration farmer for Farming Connect, and he is now a mentor with the mentoring service delivered by Farming Connect. He has a wealth of information and experience and has implemented a number of environmental projects on his farm, hand in hand with running a successful business, as well as winning a number of awards in the agricultural sector. Also, we have Geraint Davis, who's a farmer from Feudwariain Uchaf at Bala, who also, I should add, is a member of Natural Resources Wales Board, and also the chair of the Meirionnydd branch of the Farmers Union of Wales. And the farm is a focus farm for Farming Connect. And currently we are looking at a project to look at improving hedgerow structures to run hand in hand with the rotational grazing system on the farm for the suckler herd there. Next, we have Alvin Edwards, who is a forestry consultant who, again, has a wealth of knowledge and information in this area, has worked a great deal in the forestry industry. He also is a Farming Connect mentor as well in forestry and offers his advice through the advisory service run by Farming Connect. Dr. Glenda Thomas also is the director of Food and Wildlife Group, FWAG. It's a well-known body and has offered a range of advice and information for farmers on environmental issues to improve habitats on farms using various schemes and methods. And Glenda will lead on a project working hand in hand with Farming Connect to identify biodiversity status on 3 of our demonstration farms over the forthcoming few months. So that is an exciting project that we truly look forward to. And finally, I'll introduce Rhys Owen, who's the head of Conservation, Forestry and Agriculture for the Snowdonia National Park. Rhys is a familiar figure for farmers in Snowdonia and has achieved a great deal in the environmental area of work. And has implemented a number of various schemes. And I'm fully aware that he has a scheme in hand currently, or a scheme that is about to start, in order to offer farmers in Snowdonia an opportunity to undertake work to this end. Also, wearing his farmer's hat, Rhys, so he sees both sides of any debate or argument. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us for this evening's webinar. And without further ado, I'll hand you over and start by taking James's presentation, and he will, please bear in mind that you can submit your comments and any questions using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. I should remind you of that. It's important that you do so. So James, over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraint. Good evening, everyone. So I'm James Byatt, working National Forest team in Welsh Government. So I just want to say many thanks for taking the time to join this session tonight. We're really keen to use it to hear views from all of you to help inform our thinking on the approach that we take to creating a national forest in Wales. I'm going to spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes just sort of running through the background to the National Forest in case you're not all aware, roughly where we're at, and then provide an overview of some work we've been doing recently on the outcomes that we'd like to see from the National Forest. So the First Minister, Mark Drayford, announced his intention to develop a National Forest of Wales in his manifesto commitments in 2018. Through planting more trees and enhancing existing woodlands, a National Forest can provide many opportunities for Wales, such as contributing to decarbonisation goals and the climate change emergency, supporting a reverse in the decline in biodiversity, positive effects on physical health and well-being of our people, supporting commercial business activities such as timber production and adventure tourism. On the 12th of March 2020, so 12th of March this year, the First Minister officially launched the National Forest Programme. It was the programme rather than the forest itself. Together with the Minister for Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs, Leslie Griffiths, he described an ambition for a national forest that extends the length and breadth of Wales and announced that an extensive period of stakeholder engagement would commence, so that creating a national forest will be a collective effort with government, business and communities all working towards a shared goal. However, despite our best intentions to start the engagement period in late spring, early summer, as with everybody, COVID-19 struck. We had to delay our plans, rethink how we could do it in this new ways of working. So today's meeting is really the start of that engagement, which we hope to start, 4 or 5 months ago. So where are we now? So it's worth mentioning the National Forest Programme is still at a very early stage of what will be a long-term phased programme of activity. We want to use the engagement period to understand how we might approach a national forest in Wales, so the proposals work for everyone and deliver the maximum benefits. Today's meeting will be really helpful for understanding what you think will make the National Forest a success and is the start of that conversation. We'll be talking to lots of other groups of stakeholders over the coming months to get their views, with the intention to bring proposals together into a more formal consultation period next year. So this isn't going to be the last opportunity you'll have to comment. There'll be lots more opportunities. So we're working on the basis the National Forest will be in both urban and rural locations. They will include existing, good quality, well-managed woodlands to make the best of what we've already got. focus on enhancing unmanaged woodlands to get them up to a good standard, and also planting new areas of woodland across Wales. To create a national forest that spans the country and benefits the whole of Wales, we're not limiting ourselves to one or two large areas of woodland, but instead we have been developing a set of outcomes which, if woodlands are able to meet, can be badged national forest. We're currently developing a national forest brand as we speak. I'll come back to the idea of outcomes-based approach later in a few minutes anyway. I'll come back to that shortly, so keep that in mind. So you may be aware that Ministers allocated £4.5 million in capital funding to the National Forest this year to start to test future funding and delivery models for National Forest. Some of the projects include, so I think it was a couple of months ago now, but we launched the Forestry Industry Recovery Scheme. So some of you may have seen that, which provides funding for building tree nursery capacity in Wales and other things such as ground preparation equipment for tree planting. If you're not aware of it, but might be interested, I think it closes on the 18th of October, so there's not a great deal of time left, but it might be worth looking out for. That's the Forestry Industry Recovery Scheme. We've also been working with the National Lottery Heritage Fund on a community woodland grant scheme, which runs over 2 years, aimed at sort of community woodlands. People coming together to develop those community woodlands, enhance them. But it's a 2-year program, but it's on a first come, sort of first served basis. And then we're also working with National Resources Wales, NRW, to enhance woodlands and improve access to woodlands on the Welsh Government woodland estate, and also looking for them to create new woodlands that could be part of the National Forest in the future. I think it's probably fair to say that whilst the National Forest will include grant schemes, we're trying to view it as more than just another grant scheme and more of a catalyst for woodland creation across Wales. For example, as I've said, we want it to include other existing good quality woodlands that are there already, whether that's for people already in Wales or encourage visitors to come to Wales, as well as other woodland creation enhancement under other initiatives and schemes where they meet the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. So all of that will come together to help us to achieve our Connected National Forest, creating an asset possibly similar to the coast path that we've already got in the future, but we're talking quite a long way down the road for that, but certainly a national asset that could be along those lines would be a great achievement for us all. So that's the first bit of the presentation. I'm now going to focus a bit more down on some work we've been doing recently. So if David could share the slide, or start to share the slide that I sent across. But so as I touched on earlier, we've been thinking about taking an outcomes-based approach to the National Forest rather than geographic approach. So rather than limit ourselves to a few areas in Wales, we wanted it to be spread across the whole country, so everybody has access to the National Forest. We'd like to use the discussion today to get a sense of the outcomes that you would like to achieve from a National Forest. We're really keen to hear ideas from yourselves, but as a starter for 10, we've recently been giving it some thought along with our Woodland Strategy Advisory Panel Task and Finish group, and we've come up with 6 potential outcomes. So I can't see the screen at the moment, so I'm assuming, yeah, it's there. Just checking it's there. These are very much work in progress, so feel free to feed in any comments during this session today. If they're not quite right, or you've got other ones you'd like to add, then let us know. I'll just quickly run through the 6 outcomes. I don't want to spend too long on it, but I'll quickly run through the 6 outcomes, provide a little background as to why we've proposed each one, and maybe touch on some of the questions we'll need to work through either with yourselves and others. It's worth mentioning, before you all sort of reel back in horror, that these outcomes for the National Forest are for the programme as a whole. So we wouldn't necessarily expect to see all of the outcomes at each woodland that we enhance or create. We maybe see a mixture of them at different woodlands, but things like good quality, well-managed woodlands, for example, is something we would want to see at all National Forest sites. So if I just quickly run through the 6 outcomes. So the first one is around good quality, well-designed and managed resilient woodlands. I've already touched on this, but it's essential we enhance our existing woodlands and accelerate the rate of tree planting in Wales in both rural and urban locations if we're to meet the challenges of the climate change emergency announced in 2019 and support a reversing the decline of biodiversity in Wales. Wales woodlands can also provide many other benefits, such as health and well-being, recreation, tourism, ecosystem services, timber supply and employment opportunities. The key question around this one is how are we going to define good quality, well-designed and managed resilient woodlands? There are standards out there already, such as the UK Forestry Standard, and there's also the UK Woodland Assurance Standard, potentially others that we can look at. We know they don't necessarily lend themselves to all types of woodlands, so there will be further work needed here. We've included resilient in this outcome because it's going to be really important to ensure the woodlands we enhance and create are future-proofed and stand the test of time, particularly in light of climate change. So that's going to be a really important element of that. I'll come back to that in one of the other outcomes slightly later. We'd really like to see woodlands accessible to people. Woodlands provide a range of benefits to people, including improving people's health and well-being, support community development, employment opportunities and learning opportunities, new skills, etc. The National Forest will need to be accessible to enable and encourage diverse people with different needs and issues to use the woodlands. The key question here is, how do we define accessibility? It'd be interesting to get views from yourselves as part of this discussion, if possible, how you would define accessibility. We could think of it at sort of the national level and making it easier for people to get to woodlands, having the woodlands close to where people live. And then obviously once they get to the woodland themselves, having things in infrastructure in place to support the visitor experience and responsible access of the woodlands, whether it's things like signage and clear footpaths and clear signage. Knowledge and skills is a cross-cutting theme of the National Forest. I think it'll be particularly important for this outcome. So we can create lots of great woodlands, but if people don't know they're there or how to use them properly and responsibly, then we won't realize the benefits. So I think that's something that'll be important here too. Okay, community involvement in woodlands. So sort of leading on from the last one, we really want the National Forest to help communities to re-engage with nature. I think this is particularly important in urban areas which may lack green spaces. We'd like to see local communities involved in developing plans for restoring and creating woodlands in their local areas. Ideally, this would also lead on to opportunities to get involved in the enhancement, creation, and management of the woodlands, to setting up of voluntary groups and school groups. Now, appreciate community involvement. There'll be different elements of different levels of community involvement. For some woodlands where there aren't communities nearby, or they're maybe not so interested, it might be a very light touch consultation exercise. But there may be other areas where there's a lot of interested stakeholder groups, people want to get involved, and there may be the opportunity to do more of the management and the co-design, etc., of the woodlands. But it really depends on where it is, the location, and how engaged everybody is. But we wouldn't want this to be a barrier to put people off creating woodlands, but it's something we would like to see. Connected woodlands is an important outcome. So I've touched on this before, but the National Forest will be very important for helping to halt the decline in biodiversity in Wales. So as existing woodlands are enhanced and new woodlands created, it'll be really important to take connectivity into account to help connect habitats, build resilient ecological networks to enable nature to recover and flourish in Wales. And again, this is one thing, it's really good for everyone to take this into account. I appreciate, particularly in the early years of the National Forest, it may not be possible to connect all woodlands to other woodlands, and we need to define what we mean by connected as well. There's different ways of connecting woodlands, which may come up in the discussion later. But again, it's something we'd like to take into account, and it will become easier in time as Wales becomes more wooded. But for now, it should be something that's seriously considered. There's also a question around whether we think about connectivity more broadly than just nature as well, and whether we think about it from a people perspective as well, and how we connect people to the National Forests, whether it's through footpaths, cycle paths, so that if we are going to create something similar to the coast path, say the National Forest Path or National Forest Way, how do we make sure people are engaged and connected to it as well, and also emotionally connected, which will be important. So we've got dynamic multi-purpose woodlands and trees. So the National Forest should aim to maximise the economic, social and environmental benefits that can be delivered from woodland through the creation of multi-purpose sites. This could include all sorts of things ranging for leisure and tourism, combined with small local level enterprises such as firewood, local sawmills, woodcrafts, carving and turnery. Could be large scale commercial timber harvesting businesses supplying more homegrown timber to our industries such as house building, whilst also supporting biodiversity. So the question really interesting to hear is how can we encourage more multi-purpose woodlands that do deliver for people, nature, and also commercially, and how realistic that is. And then the last one is woodlands that demonstrate learning, research, and innovation. We're keen that national forest sites, and this won't be for all national forest sites, but we're keen that certainly some national forest sites do demonstrate what can be, what you can really achieve from doing really nice, good quality, multi-purpose woodlands. There's lots of good work out there already, which we can build on. We can test new ways of working and share that innovation, research, and learning with others. I'll give you a few examples of what we're thinking about, but this could be all sorts of different things, but it could be from new and different ways of delivering multi-purpose woodlands, engaging local communities in their development and management, new ways of supporting biodiversity or testing new ways of supporting biodiversity, different ecosystem services which could be provided, such as flood and drought protection, ensuring resilience to future climate change, choosing the right trees in the right places, and education opportunities involving schools, etc. in woodlands. So again, the sort of question would be good to hear from people is, how can we use the National Forest to demonstrate what can be achieved from multi-purpose woodlands? And what sort of things would you like to see more of, or we could do more of? So I'll stop there. I mean, before I hand over, as I say, there's quite a few questions there. It'd be good to understand what you would like to achieve from National Forest as part of this discussion today. And if you have any thoughts on the outcomes I've quickly run through, or if there's others that you would like to see, then feel free to share that with us today. But thank you very much.
Sorry, Grains, da chi ar mute.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much, James. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much. That presentation serves as a good starting point for this discussion this evening. Just to be clear that this concept of this project, that it isn't a grant scheme specifically. People have been talking about funding and so forth. The National Forest is not a grant scheme, but it does look at various means and elements for funding work for this concept of the National Forest. So just to start then, I'll put a question to the panel to start with, so that we can take a very quick overview. And if you don't mind, Rhys, I'll start with your good self. I'll put you on the spot for this one. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll probably guess that I have got plenty to say. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. It's something that's quite exciting and new. I must say that when I heard, first of all, about the National Forest, I had something of a panic attack because I didn't know much about the concept, and the announcement came out that there would be a National Forest, and I was pretty much in the dark about the concept. But as was explained earlier, obviously the COVID situation really hasn't helped to get those key messages out in the way that officials had hoped. So I hope that for anyone who feels as I did, have been convinced that now the process actually starts, and I feel a bit more comfortable about that, and that reflects the authorities' position. And it's a good period to start and to begin from the beginning. As a national park, clearly this does hit a number of buttons for us, our families and the area of natural beauty. We deal with access, with habitats, with archaeology, with people. We contend with climate change, with landscape changes on a day-to-day basis, pretty much. So it's a big part of our thinking processes. I think it's excellent that we have something to look forward to, that we can pass to future generations as a resource, that we can leave something as a legacy for the forthcoming generation that they can be proud of, as opposed to a pile of mess everywhere. At least there'll be something positive that we can leave for future generations, with the potential of being a good resource for use by local communities, by people who are visiting. We often see what the impact of the coastal path is on the economy, and it does draw people to that area. And we are living in an age where people don't always want to travel far, possibly less aviation. We've got an additional feature on our doorstep, and that is something that would be an exceptionally valuable resource for us. But, and I guess that you knew that there would be a but, we've got to do it in a way that is wise and sensible. We've seen with this COVID situation on a daily basis in Snowdonia, the impact that excessive numbers of people in one place have at the same time, not following rules and regulations, not respecting or showing respect to natural resources or to private land ownership. So that's the one issue that really concerns me when we talk about access to these areas and how we define and how do we demonstrate to people where people are welcome and people may be a bit more apprehensive about letting people onto the land, and areas that possibly may be too dangerous for people to access. There is talk that there is an element of these forestry areas being productive in terms of forestry activities, and obviously there are implications to that in terms of how forestry departments function, how they work, and how we close areas off for timber felling, etc. So there's a number of practical issues that we'll have to really think about carefully. We've seen open access maps, etc., in the authorities area and the parks area. The sad thing is that people can't seem to read a map. So a line on a map, sadly, isn't much by way of help to explain to people where they can actually go, where they're welcome to go to, and where they are not. And that is something that'll take a hell of a lot of work, I believe. But it's early days. We need to look at this positively. We need to move forward. And the one thing that I would say is that we are fighting a war, if you will, fighting against Rhododendron proticum in Snowdonia and trying to get our natural woodlands in as good a fettle as possible and to be as productive as possible where appropriate. So it is important that we have the right resources to look after what we have already before we rush to plant many more trees and find that we don't have the resources or the skill base to manage them or look after them in the longer term. Now, I'll pause there because you've got such a large panel, and I'm certain that there are others who are keen to give their views and opinions. Thank you, Rhys, for that. I'll now pass over to Glenda. Do you want to unmute, Glenda? There we go.
I've written my little notes in English. So first comment, really, it's excellent and refreshing to hear the government and the ministers talk of something long term and all encompassing. Excellent. The people will start thinking, hopefully, much more about woodlands and forests and what have you. And on the other hand, I think we also have to make sure that the government and its ministers stop destroying trees and woodland as well. So sort of a bit of practice what we preach there. The refreshing thing is, I think, the focus on the importance of woodlands, trees, and nature in general on physical and mental health. I think this is excellent that this has been this concept has been picked up and run with, because at the end of the day, it's almost like preventative medicine, isn't it? Which, as perhaps a country, as a society, we haven't been too good at delivering so far. So that's excellent. Good to hear the focus on managing woodlands, and I agree completely with what Chris just said. At the moment, certainly on the woodlands that I know about, which are farm woodlands, or know a little about, it has been in all agri-environment schemes, more or less, that I've been involved in. It's fence, woodland, and walk away. So it's good to hear talk of managing. And of course, at the moment, well, in fact, for quite a number of years now, it's only been grant schemes for planting woodlands generally available. So that's excellent. What I'd like to see is much more talk about individual trees, rows of trees, veteran trees, orchards, along farm, rows of trees along farm boundaries or whatever. I think those ought to be given the sort of the same sort of status as vast areas of woodland. I would be very careful with sort of coming out with reversing the decline in biodiversity. that completely depends on where you're going to plant any new trees. That could be destroying biodiversity. That's a very big statement to come out with, but the other statements of what the woodlands will bring to us, I agree with. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Glenda. Gwerthfawr iawn y
Thank you,
sylwad.
Glenda. Thank you very much for those valuable comments. I'll now ask Alwyn to speak. Can you hear me, Alwyn?
Okay. Alvin Edwards. Bit of my background. I was 20 years with the MOD Forester, and now 10 years self-employed. And as Geraint said, I help with mentoring. And you want to think there's a parallel between working for the MOD and mentoring farmers on the uplands, but actually there's a huge parallel. And I'd like to follow on from what Glenda was saying. That a lot of the farmers I meet, they tend to regard the woodlands that they've got as either dead ground or a worry about cross-compliance issues. And I've really got to go back to basics with them, because when I worked for the MOD, I was on the operational side of things. So it was implementing the state strategy, which is very similar to actually implementing that, but within the primary objectives of the landowner, which was usually a colonel, often ex-SAS or paratroop regiment, who wanted to train in the woodlands. Now it's very similar to a farmer. He wants to use the woodlands, but then he wants to, and then to get funding, you've got to deliver higher level objectives. Now they often worry farmers. So my job in the MOD was to actually say, right, we've got the higher estate strategy, but how do we deliver the primary objective? So I'm very interested on how these higher level strategic objectives get translated into the operational side of things on the farm. And that's the kind of work I'm doing with Farming Connect, really. It's going out there, listening to farmers, and actually getting to the bottom of their primary land use or primary objectives, and helping them to discuss, what are the objectives for the land. We talk about succession and keeping people on the land, creating enough work. So I'd like to see, actually, I know Farming Connect are, they create templates. There's got to be a lot more work on helping farmers to deliver these higher level objectives.
Iawn, diolch, Alwyn.
Thank you very much, Alwyn. Geraint, we'll pass over to you then for your comments.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the panel, and please forgive me. My notes are in all languages, and we'll see how we go. So, a National Forest for Wales. Just thinking the most simplistic format, how I could fit into this as a farmer who may have a key part to play in achieving the targets of establishing this national forest. And I feel quite fortunate that when I grew up as a young lad, I hated pretty much every tree, and I thought, well, how can I get rid of these to have nice grassland everywhere? And I still like to think that I'm young, but my ideology has changed significantly. And we now have a cluster of trees that are oak trees, historic oak trees in the middle of the farm, about an acre's worth of them. And since I took the farm over from my parents, we've been growing out from that acre, and we've been creating this connectivity as we go. So I feel that we are fortunate to be able to work with the national park in looking at hedgerows, running from one cluster of woodland to the next, and fencing those areas of woodland off. And that system has worked quite well. We are quite happy, and it's something that we wish to expand further on in future, and that we hope that we can be a part of this as a farm. And we feel that we've been fortunate in the way that we've been able to access it and to be involved in it. We've created more than just hedgerows and woodlands. We've created shelter belts for the animals, and it's been something that's really changed the appearance of the farm, where there's shelter that's been created. We find that we get earlier grass growth, we got longer grass growth at the shoulders of the season, and it's been a tremendous transformation for the farm, where we've been able to plant trees where it's suited and where it was appropriate. And it's important that the trees are put where it suits the farm, so you get the best possible delivery for a farmer who wishes to look after nature, who wishes to create something, and who also wishes to create food, because ultimately we are a food producing nation, and we can't just brush that food production under the carpet or offshore it to other countries just to tick a few environmental boxes. So in moving forward to the 6 points that were in the presentation and so forth, personally, I feel that the one point that we could really succeed on, and that we could succeed on all of them based on individual farm approaches, and also it could grow then outwards from that. I feel fortunate that we live in what is the ideal area that has that right balance, I would judge anyway. This weekend, for instance, we went for a walk over to Coed y Brenin, and the facilities, everything that's offered there is something that we can work from, that we can build from Pan Wales, and it can be done relatively easy, I feel. And we could do a great deal and could really achieve much of this work of establishing the National Forest without getting into too much trouble and without going to too much trouble. Thank you very much, Geraint. More than anything else, you speak there about that mantra of the right tree being in the right place for the right reason. And obviously, very precious comments. I'll now turn to Richard, please, if I may.
Good evening, Geraint. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to be invited along to the panel this evening. As a very interesting presentation. Unlike Geraint, in a way, we've spent the last 20 years in environmental scheme, first with Tŷ Gofal and later with Glastier Advanced, where we've created a lot of new hedgerows, streamside corridors, joining to existing woodlands down to rivers, and bat roosts and new hedges for bat flights. So we've sort of worked along the conservation route, but at the heart of our business is production of, high quality Welsh beef and lamb. And I think another advantage and a plus for this national forest is the fact that it takes the sort of sustainability of what we produce in Wales to an even higher level, and it widens the margin between sort of poor, environmentally damaged imported food to the high standards that we produce here in Wales. So I think it does add to the production of food in Wales as increasing the sustainability. I know it has been mentioned about this not a funding part of the National Forest, but hopefully for farmers to be involved, if they can sort of add value to the poorer production parts of their farm by growing timber, and then encouraging employment and diversification. Possibly with the National Forest, you could include sort of softwoods, some sort of sweet chestnut that could be used on farm for farmers to create their own stakes and posts, and just making more of a circular economy with the wood. So yeah, no, I think there's something there for everybody. Thank you.
Excellent, Richard. Thank you very much. Yes, but some very good points there. I'll just throw a question to James or Anne, whoever wants to come in. A lot of good work being done by farmers with the environment already, with several schemes that have been implemented by Welsh Government and about bodies like the National Park, etc. I think Woodland Management and everybody would there would be a consensus on this, has been in a hiatus for a long time now, with no real incentives there When I talk about incentives, you know, assistance for farmers to deliver quality woodland management, we need to bring that back on the agenda. Is there, first of all, a vision to deliver some kind of assistance for that in the future? And will the concept for National Forest be part of that if it does occur?
Certainly, woodland management, as I mentioned a few times, is going to be a really key part of the National Forest going forwards. It's too early to say exactly what the sort of funding streams will look like in future years, but it's certainly something we're thinking about at the moment, and it is going to be a key part. And we're obviously talking to our colleagues in Welsh Government that are sort of looking at the sustainable farming schemes going forward and linking up with them. So even if it potentially wasn't part of our scheme, it could be part of another scheme. It's a bit too early to give you a proper answer at the moment, but it's certainly something we are looking at the moment, thinking about.
Yeah, diolch James. Dan ni yn cael cwestiynau
Thank you,
mewn.
James. We have received some questions, so I'll start to ask these. I'll take the first one now, and this is based on the carbon element and the opportunities that exist in future to draw money to gain some income benefit with the Woodland Carbon Code. I'll read the question in English.
Carbon code is only currently available for new woodlands. This doesn't make sense. While the National Forest scheme isn't focused on grants, if existing woodlands could get some funding via carbon offset payments, that would help keep them healthy. For example, the previous owners of our property obtained a woodland grant in 2001 to establish a woodland. We are no longer under any obligation to keep the woodland. Surely being paid to keep it healthy is the equivalent to being paid to create a new one. Our trees are probably small enough that we could cut them down without a permit. And if we don't thin, they will be unhealthy and maybe diseased. And at that point could be cut. So funding to help us keep the existing woodland and keep it healthy is important. Something that you just acknowledged, James, and we, you know, part of the topic. Ydy pawb yn cydweld â hynna? So rwy'n siŵr neidio mewn?
Are we all in agreement with that? Does anyone wish to jump in on that particular subject? I'll speak on that if I may, Geraint. I think that is a very well made and valid point. As we discussed earlier, maintaining and keeping natural resources is something that tends to be quite an expensive exercise. Yes, grazing is one answer, and using agricultural system to work hand in hand with the conservation exercise. But often there is an element of cost in bringing experts on board to provide advice, or getting practice set up or procedures set up practically on land. And it's a point that has been picked up on in the consultation for the new BPS replacement scheme. It's been noted that it's difficult for certain holdings that have been in Tir Cymen, Tir Gofal, Glaston and so forth, who have invested heavily in capital works. And possibly under this new scheme, they will not be eligible to get any more of that capital work done, but still have the costs of maintaining what infrastructure has been put in place already. And it is important, therefore, I would emphasize the importance of maintaining that investment that has been made. Or sometimes it can be wasted work. So I feel that it's absolutely essential that there are income streams available in order to maintain past investment. And the second point in the comment or question talks about advice as to what to do. And again, it's a reflection of the skills shortage or the shortage of capacity in the forestry sector here in Wales to be able to provide advice and guidance and assistance, if appropriate, to undertake the work. So it's great that one of the scheme's objectives means that we look at the improvement of skills and understanding about woodland and about forestry. Certainly, by the time that these trees will have been planted and will be ready to be managed, we will need more people who are skilled to do that work. Thank you, Rhys. Does anyone else wish to speak on this?
Glenda?
Absolutely crucial to bring in management, and I think what's happened is a absolute stagnation under agri-environment schemes so far on the woodland management front, because it's just been too easy from probably the government inspection point of view to just stop, fence out and walk away, whereas we need to get the farmers back involved with their woodland, and the only way to do that really is to either have a separate standalone scheme, or hopefully, as Rhys was mentioning, let's have it in the new scheme, which is going to sort of replace both the BPS, the single farm payment, and Glastir. That it must be an integral part of that, because it's just, I think, I've been trying to remember when we last had any sort of woodland management grant available nationwide. I think it was at least 10 years ago when they had Glastir Woodland Management Scheme open. So it's desperately needed. And once there's a trigger, once there is a scheme, that'll be a trigger to hopefully keep the advisors and the people with skills to look after or to manage those woodlands. And of course, the sort of the grazing of the woodlands is important as well. But at the moment, of course, we've got unmanaged woodlands that grazing stock couldn't even penetrate. So there's a huge task in front of us there, and hopefully the National Forest will be a bit of a trigger for that.
Oh, diolch, Glenda.
Thank you very much, Glenda.
Alwyn, have you got any quick comments on woodland management?
Yeah, I understand that point of view. You know, there's a balance of when it becomes economic, isn't it? It's that gap between economic, because the markets, you know, it's hard to argue against that. You know, the economic markets are either there or going to become more and more available. You know, we're a country where we only supply 19% of our wood products from homegrown timber. You know, there's not many industries that poor delivering to the market in this country. You know, compared with Great Britain, you know, we're the second largest net importer in the world of timber products. So it's that gap, isn't it, that we're talking about between when they become economic and you know, the establishment phase. And I do think that, you know, some of these objectives we're talking about providing environmental goods, aren't we? Now, as you know, somebody sat in Welsh Government, you know, you've got to prove that you've provided those environmental goods. That could be at the thicket stage. You know, we've talked about, you know, maybe getting into the carbon market, but that's very difficult. You know, you've got to show additionality to get a worldwide carbon market. That it wouldn't have happened unless you wouldn't get funding unless oh, I've lost my thread there. But you can't get it for established woodlands because they've already established. You don't need the extra funding from carbon markets to have those woodlands. So that's a difficult one. But you know, there's lots of other layers in Wales. You know, we've got so many GIS layers now covering Wales. And I'm sure you can target each woodland to one of those GIS layers. You know, I'm dealing with Glastir woodland creation at the moment, and the new scheme, there's so many different layers for Wales, you know, from flood prevention, noise pollution, you know, being close to populations. Every part of Wales has got a score, you know, so if you've put your block of woodland there, you can develop a score for your woodlands to that deliver these environmental goods or public benefits, or you know, the terminology is. So I'm sure there's a way of, you know, hitting that target in a constructive way at that gap between economic and the planting stage. So I'm sure there's ways and means of doing it, and with, you know, using these headings as proof that you're delivering on Welsh Government targets. So there must be an opportunity to use the same scoring system that you have for blasted for, plantations that are already established.
Diolch, Alwyn, thank you. Yeah, it's a good point, really, to be eligible, or for the woodland to be eligible for the National Forest. I just wonder, will there be a set standard when you talk about resilient woodlands and woodlands that are fit for purpose to be a part of the National Forest? So that's something that I'm sure that will evolve. Go on to the next question, and establishing woodland, and the communism. Well, the subject is multi-purpose woodlands, but the question being, what about agroforestry? Beth,
what about agroforestry? What's the attention on this? Geraint, would you like to start on this one? Yes, no problem. I'll comment on this. Yes, in terms of agroforestry, the silver pasture, whatever you wish to call it as a descriptor, it has got a part to play. And I've answered in the Q&A there what the issue is. I've got more of it here than I've had previously. There are some on the tenant farm on the ruler's estate. My tenancy agreement prohibits me from planting trees everywhere because I'm seen to be diminishing the value of other people's land. But the land in Llanuwchllyn, I'm thinking of looking into it there because I've got a bit more freedom. I own that land, and to be honest, that land is quite difficult land to produce meat that the market is happy to pay for in the UK. The lambs produced there are being exported to Europe. So I do think that if I lose that market, what else can I do on that parcel of ground? And putting a few more trees in there is an intention that I have. And we have tried to plant a few there under the glacier woodland creation, but that failed other than in one corner because there's habitat status there. Many of them have been choked by ferns and all the rest of it. So I can see that there is a good role for trees to play there, and also being able to graze the woodland in future will be important. And the benefit that cattle can bring to a woodland is absolutely phenomenal, but it's got to be targeted grazing at the right time. And I think that every single element of the agroforestry mindset, it has a part to play on a number of farms, but understand what the farmer needs and can deliver is important as well. Understanding that, certainly I agree. And just to carry this discussion on with another farmer, Richard.
What are your views on that option? And maybe would it be a category suitable for National Forest?
Yeah, on our farm, we through the Govel years, we used to lightly graze some ancient woodland, and that woodland was really nice. Cattle used to go in and out, only lightly grazed. And when we joined Glasgow Advance, we were forced to fence it off, otherwise we couldn't enter it. And I didn't really want to, but we had to fence off 80% of the woodland, and that's turned to a massive bramble. It's embarrassing. The change from having it stock excluded is a shame. So yeah, I think it's very positive to let livestock in a controlled manner into woodland. It's positive.
Yeah, specifically with undermanaged woodlands, and as Glenda alluded to earlier, some of them are inaccessible now, and I know from experience that you won't get better management than cattle getting into woodland to trample and create seedbeds, etc. So there is something to be said for it, but in a controlled manner is the important sentence there, I think. On agroforestry, so rwy'n arall sydd dod I mewn ar amaeth
Does anyone
Gwydwygaeth?
else wish to comment on agroforestry? Glenda?
Dau peth sy'n ni'n dweud sydd yn
The two things that I would say that's vitally important when you think about climate change that's obviously upon us, this shade and shelter mentality.
Our summers might hotter, then livestock will need the shade, and likewise we'll have perhaps more extremes in winter, and they'll need the shelter of the tree. So that's may well climb up farmers' agenda as we see, if we do carry on seeing changes in weather conditions.
Yeah, diolch, Glenda. And then
Thank you, Glenda, for that.
Here, with regards to agroforestry, there's silvo-arable agroforestry, crops planted beneath trees, producing 3D levels of cultivation with produce emerging at different times of the year. So trial we ran at Henbais in Bangor in growing forage crops within tree alleys. That was very successful. It is an option, and with the multi-benefits of that trees can provide, agroforestry option gives you a win-win, because you can still produce crops and produce food. With regards to facts alluding to carbon sequestration, it will equal any commercial forestry stand, the combination of grasses and trees, and the carbon they sequester. So ymlaen I gwestiwn nesa, if you wish
So
to
we move on to the next question.
Will there be a look at planning regulations to encourage local authorities to prioritise tree planting? And I'll throw that at you, Rhys, with regards to being a National Park Authority. The question was, in urban areas, will there be a look at planning regulations to encourage local authorities to prioritise tree planting?
Well, yeah, mae'n diddorol iawn.
That's an interesting one, to be honest. I had this question when I was on some radio program recently, and I don't think that any local authority that I know of have a policy that's against planting trees. But I think the essence of the question is that they don't plant more, and this is quite similar to the agricultural sector. It's all to do with land use and land value in future, and the lands that are owned, will it be required for development? We've heard that there is a shortage of housing. That issue is heard of frequently, and much of the land that local authority owns, they tend to be open spaces in towns and so forth. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, and those green areas are needed for health and well-being and for leisure activities and so forth, but the pressure for development will always be there. So yes is the simple answer to it. There is scope to look at the policy. I think that a number of local authorities are fearful of costs. Our budgets as authorities have been curtailed regularly and consistently for over a decade. And we were discussing earlier that if you are planting trees, as I mentioned, there's maintenance work to be done in terms of the tree's health, their safety, especially if the public are about. That cost is augmented even further. And obviously to nurture the trees, and coupled with that, producing a lot of utilities in these areas, and gas, people seriously don't like to see tree roots around their lines. So there are a number of minor issues that add to the problems in urban settings. A different slant to look at, and this is what I thought about earlier when Glenda made that point. It is going to be difficult in rural areas as well as urban areas. It's going to be difficult in rural areas when you consider an area such as a national park. We've got the GIS tiers, we've got archaeology, habitats, and different designations in terms of conservation status and so forth, that will prohibit tree planting on any large scales in certain areas. There will be an element of agroforestry in certain areas where the landscape is exceptionally important, places such as Ardudwy. It is going to be strictly limited in a sense. So there will be a number of limitations in rural areas that will impact the amount of planting of woodland that can be done, which will put pressure on the better land when it comes to planting, and then you then come down to an economic war. In a way, we see already the dairy sector, who are exceptionally strong and vociferous, and conservation offerings are not appealing to them. And Glenda mentioned the value of shelter belts and so forth. I'm certain that a number of beef and sheep farmers can identify and agree with that. But if you're a dairy farmer, it still feels that that is relatively of no value, that is counterproductive even in terms of their industry, that cattle are standing under shelter belt instead of outgrazing, turning grass into milk. So there's a fair bit of work to do to change that mindset in some of these areas. Thank you very much for that.
There's a question here with regards to community groups. I'll throw it to you, James. We have an outdoor health project in the Dyfi biosphere, including woodland activities. Can community groups contribute to the National Forest planning at this stage?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes to that. I'm not quite sure what angle they're coming at, but yeah, certainly we want to hear from all different kinds of groups. As I mentioned earlier, we have got the National Forestry Heritage Fund community grant scheme open at the moment as well. So we want community groups to come forward with ideas for new planting in whether it's in rural or urban areas. So yeah, we definitely want to engage with as many people as possible at this point in time. So if they've got good examples, case studies, we'd really like to hear them.
Thanks, James. You are working up to a consultation period.
Yeah, so middle of next year, we're thinking about a more formal consultation period, and all of this is, we're just taking, hearing people's views at the moment, take it away, develop some proposals, and there'll be some more formal stuff next year.
So I take it, what I was going to say, I take it you'll be consulting on and maybe having a similar session with the community groups and community woodlands, maybe.
Yeah, I think some of the team have been talking to some of the community groups already, but yeah, something we'll need to pick up if there's more to do on that. But yes, yeah, we will do.
And there's another question here for you as well, James. Are there two separate parts to the provision of National Forest? One being the public access and health benefits. So it's the other one's not mentioned, but yeah, but public health access and health benefits are obviously a huge key area for access to the National Forest. But the bigger question is, the access itself, and is that under what kind of agreement, and you'd be coming to with woodland owners, but the liabilities as well, how will that be covered? Will there be financial assistance for tree safety surveys, etc., if the woodland is open to access?
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of stuff we'll need to work out over the coming months. I mean, at the moment, we do make money available to people to create wood. As I said, we've got a few schemes open at the moment where people can bid for money to create new woodlands, but it's only 1 year capital funding at the moment. So we haven't got that sort of ongoing maintenance that people probably need. But as we go forward, we can, through talking to stakeholders and others, we can understand what kind of needs there are. And it sounds like there's quite a lot of needs for ongoing maintenance. So that's something that we can take away and discuss with others in Welsh Government. But as I say, at the moment, we've only got 1 year capital funding, but we will need to think how we then fund it longer term in future years.
I think an interesting addition onto that one, James, would be insurance provision. As an ex-insurance guy, I know that it worries a lot of landowners and land managers in terms of public access, and especially with tree risks. And with climate change kicking in and seeing more tree diseases coming through, it's going to put different species at different stresses, and some of them react quite differently. The sort of ash is a prime example of something that can decline really rapidly and become quite dangerous quite quickly. So yeah, it just adds to the sort of hesitancy of people signing up to provide public access potentially to woodlands.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something again we'll need to work through as well. But thanks for that.
And just on that issue of access, I'm going back to to Richard and Geraint and even Glenda, maybe with regards to Richard. We'll come to you first. What would your what would persuade you to have public access into the woodlands on the farm? Or
I think it very much depends on where your woodlands are on the farm. I mean, if you have access that doesn't go across your existing farmland, it's a bit like asking Nissan, do you mind people walking through the factory floor to get to the forest at the back? Farms quite busy places, machinery moving around. Whereas if you can avoid the busy parts of the production part of the farm and enter the woodland safely, and again, it will come down to the economics. If you can have some help to put in signage and paths and maintain it and make a safe environment for people to enter, leave, and even if you possibly want to diversify into perhaps creating a well-being area, if there's income that'll keep family-owned farms through the use of the National Forest, and everybody's a winner. But automatic, the right to roam into the National Forest on all farms would be a complete blocker for most people, I would say.
Yeah, it would have to be by a specific agreement. I'll jump to Geraint. Ger, what's your view on public access to?
Yeah, we
need to be very careful with this one. If something happens, it would be my problem if someone goes where they shouldn't have been, and if something happens. And how do we overcome that hurdle in future? Now, I don't want to pay any more insurance to cover myself just to keep people having open access. It should be at the person who decides to enter the field where the bull is. It should be at that person's own risk. It's a bit of a grey area, I feel. I mean, if I wanted to open my farm up for people to enter every corner, I'm sure there'd be more difficulty in getting an insurance policy to facilitate that for me. But if there are purposeful areas and if people are happy to respect that, I seriously can't see a problem, and I would enjoy the opportunity to have conversations with people as I do currently. I have conversations with people who come onto the land. I like to explain to them what goes on the farm, and that conversation leads to people having an understanding that a farm is about more than just food production, and we as producers need that contact, that face-to-face contact with consumers, for them to have the whole picture of what every farm actually does and delivers. I think that's a valid point, very well made. And I'll come back to you momentarily, but I just want to go to Glenda. If you wish to make a quick comment, Glenda. How do you feel that farmers would be happy to permit access? I agree with what Geraint just said, because I feel that farmers, they are happy to have conversations with people about what goes on farms, etc. Obviously,
issues are way up the top of somebody's mind once you're inviting people onto farm. But what came to my mind when we were talking about this was maybe there could be areas where it was open access to woodlands anytime. But I think one of the, if we looked at previous agri-environment schemes and picked out the pluses, I would think that, those educational visits where groups of children, students, and it could be expanded, so anybody could, we're invited onto farms on specific times, and then the farmer was paid so much a year to have groups visit, show around, and perhaps that would be in a more controlled fashion, so that could be going on. And maybe, same as Richard was saying, you could have areas which were away from the farm and that you had created a safer an environment as you possibly can when you've got trees and branches and what have you around. I think farmers would be open to the idea, but there would have to be a lot of trust that the people were coming on to the land we're respectful of the land and the farming, the agriculture and the environmental management.
Yeah,
Is that
and just
raising
yeah,
awareness?
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
there's a big point there.
Yeah, diolch Glenda.
Thank you, Glenda, for that.
I'll just jump to Alwyn with regards to woodland and forestry, Alwyn. Similar question with regards to access. Obviously, issues with operational woodlands, but what would be your
Yeah, well, there's always an issue that's coming up. People, are worried about the liability, form branch, getting accused of not managing your woodlands correctly. There's very few cases where the landowner's been found liable. It's a case of practical management. You've got to assess the risk. And woodlands, I don't know the figures, but there's a very small figure associated with injury in woodlands. And there's guidance now. It's been reviewed and it's quite up to date now. The guidance, they call it practical tree management guidance, developed by the Forestry Safety Accord, where you actually zone the woodlands, and you could actually use the same process on a farm. I do it on mixed woodlands. You zone it, so you very much like, as Richard said, some parts where you wouldn't encourage access, or the risk could be high, and then you develop an inspection regime based on that, and you regard as landowners as a competent assessor, if you like. It's only when you come to specific dangerous trees that you want to keep, you might want to bring in an arboriculturist. So I think the concern is there, but there's ways of managing it that are regarded as practical, I think is the terminology they use all the time. So it can be integrated, but you need a strategic plan on your woodlands and implement that. It can be worked around, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, another good point. I'll crack on. There's some really positive comments on the agroforestry, and that the option should be made available and integrated into international forest. Obviously, a lot depending on different factors there, but also the need to look at flood defences and other benefits, which definitely wouldn't wish to have public access. Wooded areas alongside major roads, etc. So there are it's a matter of planning correctly, the right tree in the right place for the right reason. Again, we'll come to a question for Geraint. Back to you, Ger. What confidence does Geraint, and this is your other hat, have in the ability of Natural Resources Wales to create new woodlands, since it is continuing to clear fell each year and more trees in the Welsh Government woodland estate than it is planting annually, question mark. Last year actually added 0 hectares of new woodlands on the government's estate.
Would you like to respond to that one, Geraint? I'm happy to try to answer it. As a board member of NRW, the statistic of 0 is pretty heartbreaking, to be honest, when we have our own targets and objectives to meet, and obviously the importance of trees. Now, that question is directed, is it for commercial element forestry or to the native part of forestry? I'd like to know what the question targets, but as someone who is a board member and has my heart in land use, it is absolutely disappointing if Natural Resources Wales haven't been able to plant any new forestry. It's something, and as a board member, it's a question that need to be asked, and the answers need to be forthcoming. and we need to achieve the targets and increase the amount we try to plant every year. But the drought from 2018 has impaired on the number of trees available for planting. So it's not a clear cut of Natural Resources Wales opting out from planting trees. There are other issues that have impaired on the capacity to achieve targets.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll seek to defend Geraint on that one as well. We must bear in mind, of course, that the country has faced a number of challenges, phytophthora impacting larch and so forth, and that has meant that felling programs have had to be brought forward because of safety issues or to mitigate disease spread. It's not an easy, clear-cut answer. It's quite astonishing that there has been no more planting, but what the rationale as to why they cut, why they fell, etc., it's much deeper than just felling trees for the sake of felling trees. I'm going to move to comments now on the chat element, if I may. There is one here.
Forested nation even is likely to become a strong cultural thing through written and spoken literature, film and other media. It will obviously could be a visitor, including local people, marketing brand. I know you're working on the branding now, James, and the team in general. But do you want to throw any agree with that or
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really lovely comment actually. When I saw it a minute ago, and I think that's a really nice way of thinking about the National Forest. And I think it will be, that's where we'd like to get to, is this really strong cultural thing. And we are developing a brand, as you mentioned, that hopefully will build on that. And as we start to roll out the brand to woodlands across Wales, it'll become something that people can visit more and more and begin to love. And I mentioned the idea of a sort of emotional connectivity as well, and everybody sees it as their own bit of woodlands near where they live and they can enjoy, and they make memories with their families. I think it's a really nice way of looking at it. I like the way they've David's phrased that in his comment.
Yeah. I think one important thing there is to remember that, and integrate, and I know it will happen, the Welsh language and culture.
Yeah.
As well, maybe.
That's really important as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and to focus on that element.
It goes back to the connectivity thing I mentioned. Sorry.
No, carry on.
No, I was going to say it goes back to the connectivity point I was making earlier. When we think about connectivity, we tend to think of it as, connectivity by biodiversity, which it will be a big part of the National Forest. But it's also that connectivity to people, emotional connectivity. So thinking through that as well, I think will be really, really important.
Yeah.
And building on culture and history of Wales, the language. It's all part of that sort of connected part of the National Forest as I see it.
Excellent. And the next one here, has the Welsh Government thought about encouraging the private markets for natural capital? Carbon, we've spoken about, but access being another one we've spoken about, but no actual value to it, and biodiversity, air quality, water quality, etc. What's your thoughts on that with regards to a value?
Yeah, it's something. I wouldn't say we've done maybe wrong, but I wouldn't say we've done a great deal on it yet. I mean, as part of the work, we're going to start to develop a business case for the National Forest, so that will need to bring in those sort of elements about the wider benefits that we can get from a National Forest. So it's not something we've done a great deal on yet, but we'll do in the coming months. We'll start to think more about it.
Oh yeah. Does anybody else want to comment on that element on natural capital? Richard?
Well, I've just got a comment for James talking about branding. If he looks at the Stump Up the Trees website, and on the Bryn Arrow Mountain near Abergavenny.
Yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
And in 100-foot high letters that Keith
brilliant
is cut in and left standing. It's really incredible.
Yeah, that's great. They're
a charity raising private money to plant 1 million trees in and around the Brecon Beacons. So they're doing fine
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, we're really impressed with what they did there.
And I got one point to ask Geraint with his NRW hat on. One of the blockers I see on a lot of farm situations could be in the future that NRW to give permissions to plant on land. If farms have been in environmental schemes and that land that goes to the top of the farm closer to existing woodland might have been in sort of low inputs, no inputs for a few years, I think NRW have got a tight framework which really blocks the ability to plant that land, which is really suitable for tree growth, maybe a bit more dangerous to take tractors on now, and it really fits. Whereas, quite often that land comes in as sort of what's the word they use? Habitat land. And that's something that probably needs to be looked at, that it's not all habitat land, and whether you can sort of have a look into whether NRW are given a little bit more room to maneuver and be a bit more agile to allow trees in those areas, possibly.
Yes, definitely. It's something I would like to see myself happening, really. I think it would be pretty much fully supported by NRW to make it happen. We just want more flexibility with Welsh Government through, say that it's in a glass tier option now with no inputs. You just want flexibility coming out of it to be able to turn it into something else instead of having it stuck as a no input option, which is actually not delivering much really, because its productivity is dropping with a no input. It's carbon storage, the organic matter, it's all there dropping away from no input on it at all, and it's a big loss really there. But what you want going forward in the future is that ability within our new public goods scheme to be able to give us that flexibility to plant up these steep banks with either native woodlands or conifers for a farm income in the future and so on. I think the glass tier has failed on when we were taking out the shelter belts and so on, that the shelter belts weren't replaced at the same time because they provided that farm with an income, and that farm's not having that potential isn't there now going forward for that farm to obtain that income, say in 20, 30, maybe 40 years to harvest that shelter belt again, is it?
Yeah, no.
I think if I can jump in here as well, gentlemen, it goes to the heart of the discussions that we've been having as well in terms of how various schemes are managed and governed. The glass tier has tended to be GIS based and computer managed, and if the computer says no, then computer says no. Whereas if you had regional flexibility with people who knew the area, like we're very fortunate to have in the national park, it gives you that bit of leverage or flexibility to be able to adapt to local situations, where you can find compromise in how and where you plant, and look at different densities and so on. Whereas if you're stuck with just a national prescriptive GIS layer that says no, and people who can't interpret that data or be able to go out onto site and assess on foot if that decision or layer is correct, then it will be quite a hurdle then to overcome. So it just goes, again, it reflects the having value of people with knowledge and local people with understanding of what they've got in their areas and what will work and what won't. It's perceived by some as a cost in terms of management, but I think it's worth that in terms of the additionality or the value that it provides to agreements and being able to deliver effectively locally.
Diolch, Rhys.
I think,
Brendan,
can I come in
agree
there?
with that?
Yeah. I think this is a huge point because, as I said, I think a lot of the schemes so far, that once you're in the scheme, that's it. You can't change anything. The flexibility is not there. So that's exactly what Geraint was talking about. So just we must absolutely have that. And the other thing is the best local person in the area to decide what will work or won't work, and where the valuable habitats are or not, in my opinion, as the farmer himself, that's the starting point. If the farmer is given the freedom to come up with a farm plan, all-encompassing farm plan on all his habitats, woodlands and what have you, then that is more, in my opinion, likely to be a much better plan than anybody else's. Obviously bringing in the experts for fine-tuning that, but that's got to be the starting point to move all these objectives forward.
Oh, diolch, Glenda.
Hello?
Yeah, diolch yn fawr
Thank
ti.
you, Glenda. Thank you for that.
I can see that time is really going on, so I'm just going to cover a couple of comments and questions for you again. This is a comment, but I'm going to question or bring something up from it. Comment to say the National Forest is a wonderful idea. Engaging schools is really positive, as children who are involved in planting will nurture and protect throughout their lives. Access for schools to woodland, and there have been schemes in the past, agri-environmental schemes, Tir Gofal being one of them. I think, if I remember rightly, there was an option for access by the public to Tir Gofal paths, or a choice of 6 school visits, am I right, to woodlands for those in a scheme. Richard, were you?
Yeah, we partaked in that. It was really interesting. We had a school from Newport used to come up, and they were a Welsh-speaking school. So Helen used to try and deliver some of the visit in Welsh, and then I used to do my little bit, unfortunately, in English. But yeah, no, they were great. They were a primary school, and we used to have about 8 or 10 visits a year. Yeah, very positive.
So it's feasible that a similar concept be delivered in future schemes, really.
Yeah, and the point made earlier about them being managed as opposed to just open access, which is, as Geraint mentioned as well, can be a little bit more hazardous.
Yeah. Rhys, beth ti'n meddwl?
Rhys, what are your thoughts on this?
Sorry, the mute button.
Apologies, mute button. Yeah, access for schools rather is something that's vitally important. We often see that children lose connectivity, lose connection with rural areas, with food production, their understanding of rural areas, countryside smells, the seasons as they are seen in the countryside. So anything that brings children out of the classroom to dirty their hands, to get mud on the wellies, I think it's all fantastic. But the experiences that they're afforded must be high quality experiences. We all know a few angry, disgruntled farmers, possibly I'm one of them, but you have to have the right personality, and the message that's delivered is key. If you're going to do it, you have to do it to a high standard, as opposed to everyone trying to do it. It's not something that is for everyone, and it shouldn't be imposed on everyone. But for some who can and who enjoy doing it, who enjoy explaining, then that's excellent, and it's an opportunity. Can I just touch on that, if I may, please? One of the greatest pleasures that I had one winter was to have the primary school children from Bro Tryweryn to the farm to help us plant a hedge. And Rhydian from the National Park came down, Arwel Morris and Betty Taylor, and the local warden were with us planting this hedgerow. And myself and Rachel, my wife, shared and split the group of children, 9, 10 to 11, split into 4 groups, and it was just excellent to have the opportunity to plant a hedgerow with them, to question them, quiz them, ask them how do they think this would work, why the hedgerow was being planted, etc. And picking up an acorn and asking what you think this is, and asking if they would believe that this little acorn could be that tremendous oak over there, and so forth and so forth. And it was a bitterly cold day to be outside, but everyone left there smiling at the end of the day, and everyone had thoroughly enjoyed their experience. It's something that we need to do more of, I believe. It's vitally important that we rekindle that connection between urban areas or our consumers of the food that we produce. We really need to strengthen that link between ourselves and the consumers. I agree with you, Geraint. I wholeheartedly agree with you. In fact, it's a very valid and well-made point, and I think that there is an opportunity in future to possibly use the National Forest and the brand, if you will, that's built on that, to sell produce even as part of Brand Wales that's already been alluded to. So there is one question.
I'll throw this one to you, James. You've probably seen it. Any plans to support Welsh nurseries to supply more tree saplings, the more tree saplings we need, or are we going to be dependent on imports? There is a scheme available now to help nurseries.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we've got the Forestry Industry Recovery Scheme, which we launched a couple of months ago. It closes on the 18th of October, but the primary aim of that is to increase nursery capacity within Wales. So there's, I think, getting quite bad feedback, but there was £1.5 million put into that scheme. And if it doesn't fully go to nurseries, then there's other options around ground preparation. But the primary focus was around building nursery capacity in Wales, so we won't need to rely so much on imports. We don't want to rely on imports because of the problems that can cause. But yeah, so there is a scheme if people are interested. But it closes soon, so be quick.
Yeah, I think 18th of October you said, was it?
Yeah, 18th of October. Yeah, Forestry Industry Recovery Scheme.
Okay, thank you very much for that. If there are any other quick questions, there are comments that have come in. I'm not going to have time, unfortunately. I'm really sorry to go through them now. Hopefully we can answer you and maybe have a discussion on email. I Guy, dwi just eisiau mynd...
to close proceedings for this evening then, I just wish to have some comments from the panel individually in terms of this evening's discussion and your vision for the future and what you see as the development of something that will be positive, that we can really drive forward and to see how we can drive forward this idea of a national forest. Please, I'll turn to you first then. I get the feeling that I'm the fall guy for you this evening, Geraint. From my point of view, personally speaking, I think that if we want to bring this aspiration to reality, whatever we do as a plan has to fit in with any agricultural support that comes in future. We mentioned single farm payment and what the successor will be, any glacier agri-environment schemes. They all have to interlink and collaborate and not possibly be counterproductive to each other. We need long-term plans to be in place for this to work with the capacity to respond locally. I think that's an integral part of it. And yeah, that it's all integrated and that it all functions and that it's got longevity. We've heard so many times this evening about schemes where you have funding for a year or for a few years and it's discontinued thereafter, so that a person who's a young farmer like Geraint, that he can make a decision now and not regret it in 10 years' time when that scheme comes to an end. That is something that can keep going effectively in order for it to be something that's truly sustainable for the forthcoming generation. And is something for people to really see the value of trees and woodlands and what they are able to offer, especially for some of these dairy boys who were mentioned. So I think it is exciting and I truly look forward to see what comes of it. And on we go, I believe. Thank you, Rhys. Alwyn, I'll turn to you next.
Yeah, it appears there's a lot of goodwill out there. And I think, you know, this Stump Up for Trees has been a prime example of that. You know, it's funded outside Welsh Government, if you like. But it's all to do with these local champions taking things on. I think, you know, we're going through difficult times. And I think what it has shown us is that, you know, there's a community spirit out there. And, you know, if you get local champions on board, you know, with the branding and focus your attention on there, I think, you know, we've got the push, if you like, from the Welsh Government. But I think, you can look at a bottom-up approach. I'm very optimistic, I think, about the future.
Great, diolch Alwyn. And Richard?
Thank you, Alvin. Richard?
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I think a very positive presentation from James, very interesting. And just to touch on Alwyn mentioned then about Stump Up for Trees, they're doing a great job to try and link up people who want to fund tree planting and landowners who want to plant trees. At the end of the day, it's all about getting trees in the ground. And if the National Forest can help achieve that, and we've mentioned branding, if we can add value to Welsh lamb and beef with, further examples of sustainable ways of producing food, and hopefully create, rural jobs and helps sustain farm income to keep family farms, going well into the future.
Diolch, Richard. Thank you for that. Glenda?
Right, well, I think it's an excellent concept. It's all encompassing, which is always good. I think what we really need to be aware of is how government policy, as far as any trees or woodlands on farmland, governs so much, doesn't it? And we've alluded to the things like the negative aspects of having trees on your land as far as the basic payment scheme goes, the fence and walk away aspects of Glasgow. So we need to really focus on that. And I've been trying hard to think why the educational visits that we've talked quite a bit about now, and I talked about way in the beginning, the Tir Gofal educational visits were stopped. We tried to get them into Glasgow, and there was some reason the government couldn't. There was some funding reason or liability or something. So we need to overcome these hurdles instead of just saying, no, we're not going to do that because it's too much traffic. And then just on if I could just come back on that, nurseries, local provenance, we really must get that right, because we've been talking about that since I worked for Coed Cymru, when Coed Cymru first started, which is how many years ago now? 30 or something like that. The debate has been there. We should have thought that, but good that we're on it again. And can I just put a plea in for? We've been talking about planting. Then we're talking about planting trees from abroad. Very often, what's wrong with natural regeneration? Why do we want stuff straight away and planted? Can I throw that in? And we haven't mentioned the tenant farmers that I saw in a comment somewhere, because that's another massive issue on how tenant farmers can use their land, isn't it? And whether they can plant trees and who owns anyway the trees on their land. What I said right at the beginning, maybe we haven't really discussed much on that. Only briefly, the individual trees, how important they are. I think we should be talking about our heritage, our tree heritage, the veteran trees, the traditional boundaries, as opposed to, there's a lot of focus on woodlands. I think the other mass of trees is just as important, and probably massively important as far as biodiversity is concerned. Diolch yn fawr.
Excellent. Glenda, diolch yn fawr i ti.
Thank you very much, Glenda. And what counted to be eligible for being a national woodland, it's a decision that will have to be made, obviously. And the comment around tenant farmers, it's a vitally important one. It's an issue that hopefully will be discussed with the relationship between tenant and landlord will be discussed. And in a number of cases, tenants will not be able to have permission to plant trees before they can apply to participate in any scheme. Finally, Geraint, do you wish to comment?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. For me,
as the farmer who's going to be playing his part in meeting these targets of establishing this national forest. I want value from this for myself as a business, because at the end of the day, I am a business and I want to pay my mortgage, I want to pay the rent and so forth and so forth. So it has to be something that will be attractive for a farmer to wish to be a part of it, as opposed to something that a farmer will have to be press ganged into, that he wouldn't volunteer for it, that he's just going to do it to tick some box. And other than that, I've thoroughly enjoyed the presentations that we've had this evening and the conversations, and I have warmed to the potential of creating, as farmers, something that we can collaborate to create with every stakeholder who's a part of this, and hopefully achieve those targets that we've outlined. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And the one thing that really struck me earlier, a number talked about stumped up for trees and so forth. I noticed that certain schemes now are being approved for planting on common land, if I'm right in saying that. And naturally, common land means open access by default. So there's a rich vein there that we can follow and possibly strengthen for projects such as this one. Now, there's nothing more for me to do this evening but to bring proceedings to a close. I'm sure that the discussions could run for hours at end. Now, we've covered a fair bit of ground this evening, but there's a lot that we haven't touched on, and possibly there may be future opportunities, hopefully in the near future, especially when we'll observe developments of this concept and the project evolving. I truly look forward to seeing that happening. I wish to thank you as panelists, Glenda, Richard, Elwyn, Rhys, Geraint. Thank you, James, for your participation. And Anne, you've been quiet in the background there. I haven't brought you into the conversation. Do you wish to make a few comments? Do you have anything to say as we look to close this meeting in terms of your representation work for Welsh Government?
No, I just want to say diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much for everybody who's joined us today. It's really, really important that we engage with as many farmers as possible. They really are a key stakeholder. We were hoping to do a lot of engagement, as James said, initially over the summer period, especially at the Royal Welsh, but obviously we couldn't do that. So this really is, it's been a great opportunity. We've really have learned so much, and hopefully we can continue to work with farmers and engage more as we go forward. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Anne.
Thank you, Anne, for that.
Thank you, James. Do you want to just say a few words?
Yeah, just really thank everybody for their time this evening. I found it fascinating. It's highlighted the opportunities that are there, but also some of the things we need to think about more as we move forwards. So as Anne said, we'll keep this engagement going as we go forwards, and as time goes on, we'll be able to share more stuff with you. So thank you very much. It's been great.
Diolch, James. And
thank you, James. And I also wish to thank David and Fionn, who have been in the background dealing with the technical issues. Hopefully translation's been all right for you and that you've followed the discussions this evening. I truly hope that everyone have enjoyed this evening's debate and the discussions. Just to thank you for taking the time to join this webinar, and hopefully we'll see you in the near future. Thank you very much.